What's up, everybody? This is Karak with ACG, and it's my continuing mission for the Emperor to bring you reviews that aren't 2 minutes long or filled with sponsored bullcrap. Today, it's taken up the mantle of Space Marine Holy Warrior monks on the world's best HGH and testosterone replacement programs as they battle it out in the dark and dreary and just completely hilariously over-the-top world of Warhammer 40,000 in Space Hulk Deathwing. Out December 14th for PC for $33.99 and sometime later on the consoles. Let's see how Space Hulk did, shall we? As always, if you like the video, maybe subscribe. So here's my review for Space Hulk Deathwing, the Missionaris Galaxia, the Encyclopedia Badassery, and the Scary Bad Guy Collectica. Graphics are up first. Now, honestly, I'm both surprised and a little bit disappointed. Space Hulk aims to do for Warhammer 40,000 what Vermintide did for Warhammer Fantasy, and that's introduce more folks to the fiction. And in this case, and in many parts of the game, it absolutely looks the part, telling the tale of a future filled with dead emperors, his legions of eternally faithful soldiers, and enemies straight out of the blackest parts of the universe. Everything in Warhammer 40,000 is huge, dark, dreary, and poetically styled. And there's a reason I'm bringing this up, because form and function are meeting here. So let's talk a little bit about animation and atmosphere. See, Space Marines, who you play as in Space Hulk, are not normal people. They're genetically modified super freaks to be the Emperor's hand guiding humanity safely through the dark times, which means you're friggin' huge, outfitted with multiple hearts the size of Thanksgiving turkeys, and you carry guns that shoot unguided missiles, and you can pretty much call down psychic power like a mechanized Gandalf the Very Scary. The reason why I was so interested in this is that we've seen larger characters normally, even Gears, and the Space Marines here are man-giants, and their oversized nature is reflected perfectly within the animation. It just works, and there's an almost insane amount of graphical care when handling that speed and feel of your Walmart-sized Space Marines. And it's not just the scale of the locations that makes them incredibly unique. What other world has its heroes flying around in giant, massively ornate floating cathedral spaceships? That's right, because nothing suggests badass as much as uprooting what looks like the innards of a medieval castle, strapping scary-ass mystery engines to it, and then hip-tossing the damn thing into deep space. It all looks incredibly well done, and as somebody who's followed Warhammer 40,000 for years, they nailed it. Now, animation-wise, there is another difference, and that's with the enemies. There's a distinct similarity in both form and function with Vermintide. Enemies that are insanely fast, can crawl over the game level, and in a way, this game shares a great deal with that other title. Here, giant ratmen are replaced for the most part by Tyranids and their infantrymen-like troops, the Gene Stealers. Their design is one half Goro from Mortal Kombat, one half Alien Sprinter, and if that isn't weird enough, remember that these guys breed by tonguing you, injecting their DNA, and causing you to genetically fucking fall apart and recombine into half them and half whatever you might have been. The design throughout the world, aliens, and heroes is spectacular and nailed. Now, texture work for the most part is excellent as well, from alien to spaceship parts, and while there are a couple weaker textures like random rock piles or usually ignored debris piles, it's not too bad. Overall, I'd say that is very good. Now, while for the most part I did like the special effects, I did notice some things. This is a Horde-style game, so not everything's going to be perfect. While enemies sometimes pass through one another, there are also occasional times that they warp or clip through the ground, a wall, or something else. That's just going to happen in a game like this. Unfortunately, just like me, the game's got performance problems. I run an i7 at 4.2 and a GTX 1080, and even at 1080p, the frame rates were all over the place. That being said, really at times the game looks phenomenal. There were a number of times when I was so covered with enemies, I just started swinging my mace hoping to clear them all out. The devs want it that way. That's the type of game they aimed for. And I get that it's not for everyone, and it doesn't look like it's for everyone. It's not made to be. It's not made to be clean and tidy. It's a simulation of the countless Horde, and I think it does that well. As a package, it's good, held up by atmosphere, but unfortunately held back by questionable frame rates. Sound, music, and voice.
I have dubbed this drifting lair of abominations Olethros. A hive swarm of Tyranids already besets the system. So while the honored warriors of the Deathwing embark upon the purging of this Space Hulk, our brothers shall assist the Astra Militarum and Imperial Navy in destroying this tendril of the Great Devourer.
And sound is up first. You know, one thing is for sure, a game set almost entirely in mausoleum-styled spaceships is going to be heavy on the environmental effects, and throughout this entire experience, Space Hulk did not disappoint. From the absolutely thunderous low of thunderclaps echoing to wet slices of blades through alien tissue that echoed around the room, reverberating, everything was actually done fantastically well. And while the game isn't your typical gun porn of some titles, it does have a number of weapons, and each exhibits its own traits in the audio spectrum. Now, this is also nice because whether you're playing alone or in co-op, hearing a heavy gun spool up is warning alone that someone saw an enemy, and it absolutely pays off in spades here with excellent surround and direction audio. I was able to react many times far faster just on hearing the exact placement of a shot versus a warning or some kind of audio cue. Really good sound throughout. Music. So without a doubt, this is the leanest music I think I've ever heard in a game. Hell, most of the time, Warhammer games sound like an entire orchestra of freebase Linkin Park songs, and then we're told to get their feelings out. Sad, dreary, dirgy, but epically huge. This soundtrack is actually none of those. As ambient as it could possibly be without even being there, this is the first soundtrack I can honestly say gets out of the way too much. It enthusiastically runs away, effectively removing almost any impact it could have had on the story. Other than thin, airy ambient layering, there were a couple tracks during the intro, mission briefings, and the closing scenes, and that was it. Inadequate music, I guess I would say. And now we're talking about voice. Now, this is actually pretty well done. You have to remember going in that the game isn't subtle, it's about war, and if someone isn't warning you of the dire ramifications of failure, you're alerting someone else that by the God's hand, you didn't fail, and that's pretty much it. In fact, it's overall a very lean title, especially when you realize that for the most part, no one else talks but you and some dudes who jump in on your headset camera every couple of minutes. It's effectively very lean. Not as lean as the music, but still interestingly so. Overall, I guess I'd say what was there was okay. Gameplay. And as always, a little bit about story. So Space Hulk Deathwing tells a tale of a Space Marine unit within the Dark Angels chapter, tasked with reclaiming a derelict Space Hulk from the void across 9 somewhat lengthy chapters with many discrete missions breaking down within them. The story expands outward, soon offering a dark turn on history, your own chapter, and as Warhammer 40,000 is always primed to do, making you question what really happened. Now, co-op or single player, you basically engage in missions across the Space Hulk, usually traveling from one side of it to the other, killing as you go, with many of the enemy encounters somewhat randomized and run by an AI system that works as the Gene Stealer's one solitary mind, allowing them to clue into you. Now, normally many of us would call this a cheat, but it actually is built into the basic fiction, so it sort of makes sense here. Now, this results in incredibly tense moments where a swarm of Gene Stealers, danger thick, will engulf your team, and you're almost reeling from the anarchy and chaos around you. This is the beauty of Space Hulk. It's not really like any other games, except, as I said, there's some similarities with Vermintide. For some, it may be a bit too slow, though, but the absolute anarchy that occurs during combat is the same kind of visceral fun that I felt playing Vermintide, and I actually like the give and take of the pauses between combat. Now, while Space Hulk is one part team-based shooter with you controlling your AI squad mates or jumping into co-op and choosing a class to play with friends, it also has a small number of similarities to current titles that really surprised me. For example, much of the game is set within the derelict cores of spaceships, and doors can be locked and unlocked. The puzzle-like locking of doors to prevent, let's say, rear attacks and the almost requisite knowledge of your surroundings absolutely echoed the joy of Rainbow Six Siege's planning moments, as well as outfitting your team for one mission type and having to understand how to be flexible as frequent places and situations change. And one of the things you notice here is if you do something as, say, as simple as locking that door, it may make you safe from one attack from the rear, but it also might make you and your teammates' weapons less effective, as now the one avenue of attack is ranged bastards with rockets and machine guns, and one of your team has a friggin' flamethrower, which is about as useful as harsh language in that situation. But it also stops you from quickly retreating, and quick is the name of the game here on both sides, because 1, you aren't, and 2, the enemies are. Space Marines walk at an almost sloth-like pace, reflecting their bulk and man-take design styles, and while capable of loosely termed sprinting short distances, I consider it more like leaning forward for a second, almost falling, then slowing back down. On the other hand, the Gene Stealers are a mess of speed, coming at you from all angles, the ground, ceilings, wall, dropping down from behind you, and later on, some of the higher ones will actually be able to shoot at you, as I said before. Aliens or not, they're dead-eye dicks with rocket launchers as well, so watch out for that. But you and your battle brothers are no slouches either, and you can't be, because the game has location-based damage. So if your legs take too much, you're going to be even slower than before, and if your arms take too much, you may not be able to raise your storm shield or aim that pistol. Very cool stuff. Now, as you guys know, I test AI on every level available to see how the game holds up for newcomers who have their first foray into Warhammer Worlds coming up, to old Space Hulk fans of the original PC and console title. For the most part, it's okay, with various difficulty making changes like damage taken. While you can choose to turn friendly fire on in co-op matches, it is not adjustable in the single-player game, as the AI is good, but not that good, and with it, and if you are not careful, you'd wipe out everyone with a hammer hit or two. On the harder difficulties, the game absolutely requires teamwork. On the later ones, less so. Now, you get points for all sort of things, like enemy kills, damage done, and so forth, and then you buy level ups across 3 basic skill trees for your character. There is no chance you will get enough points to buy everything before beating the game, not even close, so deciding and strategizing the few skills you do have is paramount. You can upgrade your Dark Horse Wizard, allowing him to augment past his original lightning spell and knockback spell and get things like a massive pillar of fire that burns everything in its wake, or the ability to teleport into an enemy and explode them time cop style, and others as well. Or you can augment your leadership skill, unlocking skills for your team and new abilities you didn't have before. Lastly, you can also alter your levels of devotion, which is an almost priest-like skill tree, increasing things like experience for certain activities and bonus defenses. So I'm not going to lie, the skill tree isn't vast, but it fits perfectly with Space Marines, which live in a perfect what works world. Now as you progress, you unlock new weapons, such as the old hilarious favorite like the Storm Bolter, which is good for when your gun that shoots missiles needs to have 2 barrels and rapid fire, to the Heavy Flamer, which is the equivalent of stapling an Atlas rocket to your waist and aiming the scary end at the enemies. Now, while the inventory doesn't really stretch its legs too much, you do see things like the Thunder Hammer, which is exactly what it sounds like. You also have a hand-to-hand weapon that's more mundane, like Power Fist swords and healing spears, because nothing says, "I hope you feel better," like someone taking an oversized Stanley drill to your face. Lastly, control. And while I talked about it throughout the review and the speed and the weight, I will just point out that overall it controlled well, and whether aiming down the sights of the world's scariest handgun or taking laser-etched swords to alien flesh, I was felt in control. Sadly, once again in another category, this game didn't escape the Xenos. First, the mission structure, while okay, begins to drag in the late game, with missions having you literally go from one side of the mission to the very farthest itsy-bitsy point of the other side of the map. They don't even hide it. Admittedly, the level structure itself is actually really good and the combat is fun, but otherwise I would have rage quit. Also, while I was generally happy with the AI and it followed me well throughout the game, there were times where I wished they would heal themselves without me telling them, or wished I had the ability to say, "Hey, if you get to like 10% of your life, could you heal yourself?" Instead, some dude dies right in front of me, basically because apparently carrying 10 health packs around can cause you to have heat stroke. Now, luckily, a lot of those things are going to go away if you do co-op, but hey, you know what? They sell it as both, so it gets reviewed for that. As a package, I'd say I really like the gameplay loops and many aspects of the title itself, but it was certainly held down by some of that mission structure and some later problems I encountered. Fun factor. So what's awesome here is that the entire world just feels different. While other games and fantasies usually have some odd bits in common, they all have a lightness to them, even, like I said, with Gears attempting to feel heavy. Now, Space Hulk's very presence is that its name implies what it is, and that is reflected in the graphics and gameplay. It is a Hulk. While it may not be for everyone, the unique gameplay style, Horde AI, and all of those other aspects were really fun for me. And depending on the difficulty, you're looking at easily 8 to 12 hours. And of course, there's the co-op mode as well. Now, replayability here, though, is going to be limited to changing the difficulties and unique skill groups or different people playing. Because while the events and enemy horde are somewhat random, the level structure and mission layouts are not. So as you guys know, I rate games on a buy, wait for sale, rent, or never touch it again rating scale, with rent being replaced to a deep, deep sale on PC titles. Yeah, this is absolutely a wait for a sale. Listen, I love the game's atmosphere, and though unnamed, it's nice to have a lead that isn't Shepard from Mass Effect who ignores calls from bases and missions so he can shine the poop deck of every stray piece of ass that wanders past him on the Normandy Bridge. These dudes are born again hard, battle brothers to the bone, and can do just about anything. Hopefully, though, they can do something about the FPS and some of that mission structure, because it needs a patch, as the performance was questionable on a good machine, let alone what a lot of normal folks out there are just trying to play these games on. So as always, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up. Maybe check out Twitter, Patreon, or the affiliate links. If you dislike the video, give it a thumbs down. And as always, if you want reviews that aren't 2 minutes long or filled with sponsored bullcrap, stick with ACG. Peace out, and for the Emperor.